Oh no, another video about housing. Well, yes, housing is really, really important. And it's something Labour really has to get a hold of. Because very often, why these housing developments get cancelled. First of all, the NIMBYism, the not in my back garden people. And these are people who are saying we do not want these types of developments, whether it be new housing or sort of wind farms, etc., etc. They just refuse things outright because, well, it will affect the value of their house in some way. They don't want that. Mostly these have been coming from conservative led areas. And some of them do have, or at least have been grabbing onto legitimate reasons for their NIMBYism. And once you take away these reasons, well, then there's less reason to object. And then they become, well, no, I'm only doing it just because I don't want it in my back garden. But some of these are quite legitimate criticisms. And this has been because of 13 years of Tory austerity, the lack of proper infrastructure investment. And it's not just rail, roads, and transport. It's sewage, it's schools, it's road widening in rural areas, it's electricity grids, it's reservoirs, it's water supply, it's sewage. It is a ton of different things. And most of these housing developments that you see in these areas that are being objected to look reasonable because if you go and say a developer, we're going to build all these new houses, gets cancelled. Why? Because all the conservatives come out and say, if you build that, the roads aren't wide enough. And they have a point. You know, there is not enough sewage access. You need to build the sewage. And they have a point. They have an absolute point, and it's not just in rural areas. It's places like in my own hometown as well. There was a recent construction site of about 300 new houses to be built, but it was cancelled. First of all, because of the roads needed to be widened, because there wasn't enough proper access for the amount of traffic that was going to increase. There then wasn't enough power grid access, which the national grid needed to really get involved in to expand the access to the national grid and expand that. But of course, that's national grid. They don't have the money because of austerity. You see the whole thing tumbles down and down and down. And it's not just that. It is the clear thing we need to take on housing developers and make sure that they are building the right houses, but also securing things for the future. And Simon Jenkins has written a fantastic piece in here. We're just going to read a bit of it because it really lays out to you the situation of how we got to this point, why there is this obsession with especially destroying the high street of builders going after pubs and places like this, buying them, owning the lease for like 3 months, and then converting them because policy and especially house builders and these house developers have been heavily financing the Tories for years in able to do all this kind of crazy stuff. And they have been very much so demolishing the high street. And this is something where I think the left, we talked yesterday about the steel industry, and that the left doesn't really do talk enough about pro business. Well, because they don't do that, what occupies the high streets? It's businesses. And also, austerity has had a part to play in this. Simon Jenkins rightly points out in this article that it has been business rates that have been rising. But if you're a council and you've had your budget slashed, you can't raise your council tax without going to a local referendum, which ultimately would lose. But one thing you do have control over are your business rates. So business rates have gone up to compensate for the lack of central government investing. And unfortunately, this has become it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you increase these business rates, can anyone really afford to take on these business units in town? And thus, these places have become a ghost town. And why did this become such a problem? Well, it all goes back to when the Tories first came in under Cameron. So we're going to go read over that part to get to the point, which ultimately has now led to two serious defeats in Parliament recently. Not in Parliament, in the House of Lords. So let's go and find out about this crazy history and ultimately how this can be put right. So let's get crack on into this. But before we do that, as always, like I say, like, share, subscribe button. Like I say, please do click on those. It does help support the channel. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. There is the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club as well down below. So as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So let's go down on to this. So here we go. So the most serious have been the advent of policies to close down high street businesses in favor of new houses being built. This has followed a long battle for the Conservative Party's ear between the rural Tory constituencies and the Tory donors from the building industry. This is, again, big argument in the Tory party. It's one of the big things that's causing a big split. Because the rural constituency voters, actually, they're not just the purely NIMBYs, not in my backyard, but they're like, look, we want a good high street. We want these, we still want these developments, but we need road, we need sewage works, we need schools. As we said, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because they have not been investing in infrastructure for years. This is a mess of the Tories' own making. And you're just going to see how bad a mess it really is. And the fact that you've had this internal battle between rural constituency voters and donors from the building industry goes to show you how big a mess this is. So, in 2013, the Cameron government conceded to the builders that offices and other commercial buildings could be turned into homes without the need of permission. And at the same time, Whitehall enforced house building targets on local councils. So, as you can see, local councils, you've got to build houses. So, you can see where house building targets are at the same time, not bad, but also not good either. But of course, Rishi Sunak has done nothing, what a surprise, to honour Johnson's pledge of business rates reform. Again, Johnson promised to do that. He didn't do it either. Again, what a surprise. He also has continued to discourage conversion, not least of empty floors above shops, by retaining the 20% VAT on restoration and conversion, yet allowing new builds to be VAT-free. Something else that would be of big help of builders and or at least developers being able to take old properties and redevelop them and convert them. Now, that is, as we see here, it is bad because ultimately this has been to the detriment of local pubs and other things that have been sort of really sort of social heart of many communities. But at the same time, we all know and have seen in all our up and down the country places that could be a home, but you can't do it because it's too expensive because there's a 20% VAT on restoration and conversion. So it's obvious that builders are being incentivized by the government to go for pure new builds. And then came the big one, the massive SOP to the Home Builders Federation. And then the housing minister, Robert Jerrick, who's most responsible for a lot of these things, decided in 2021 to deregulate the the permitted development rights, or the PDRs, on high street premises, the then so-called E-class use of uses. And he was answering the pressure from developers who wanted to be allowed to buy and demolish shops, post offices, cafes, pubs, and replace them with private homes without planning permission. This is what you will get to, and ultimately has really become the death of the high street. And developers are running wild to buy up these places, own the lease for about 3 months, and then just go, oh, guess it's going to have to be a house now. The council can do nothing about it. So this was coupled with the blatant pressure in which the big building companies, which in the past have accounted for around a fifth of all donations to the Tory party, threatened to withdraw their considerable donations to the Tory cause, one having recently given over £1 million. Other reason why we should reform campaign financing rules. As you can see, you can't really do anything with housing at all under this current government. It's sad, but there you go. And then, of course, we get on to what's happened recently. Of course, this year's Jerrick's successor, Michael Gove, made a further concession to the builders' cause to try and ease the pain to an end of rural building targets. He introduced an amendment to the Levelling Up Bill that would absolve house builders from polluting local water courses. Even Tory peers could not stand for that, and was given the short shrift in the House of Lords on Wednesday. So you can just see how all this came about. It has become from developers putting pressure on the Tory government to pass policies in favor of them being able to go in, buy places, take it up. The Crooked House is one such example we recently talked about. Ultimately, we don't know what the fate of that development is going to be, but it's not alone. There are other pubs that have been bought up by developers, sat on for 3 months, and then just gone, oh, no, going to have to knock it down and convert it, of course, into new housing. So this is something that really needs to be addressed. Really needs to address. And it is a matter of policy. And one thing definitely is local councils really need to be given more power over what these developers can or cannot do. I've said this before. You've had developments where developers have said, we're going to build all these amount of social housing. The councils have gone, excellent, great, rubber stamped it. Then when it's come to building them, they have not built that type of housing. And there's nothing the council can do about it. Absolutely nothing. So there is plenty of stuff that can be done to take on these developers who do this, who use these tricks, and of course, giving councils more power to get involved in building the type of social housing to rebuild the stock that we need, desperately so. But it will take a government willing to be able to do that. And I do hope that under the next Labour government, that we will have that government that can take on those people. So we'll see what happens. But like I say, housing itself in general, big mess. As I said, this is not just a housing disaster. Well, it's not just a housing crisis we are in. It is a housing disaster. I think that's the way that we need to start really talking about, to really highlight the people of the mess that we are really in with this. So as always, let me know what you think down below. Let me know for ideas that you think would also be pretty good as well. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.